Hi, so we're here today on the new pool at Tunnel Barn Farm, and what I'm going to do is run you through how I approach or how I fish a commercial snake lake during the autumn and winter months. What I'm going to do, I'm going to approach my peg very negatively. I'm going to fish two areas on the far bank where I feed and one area down the middle. I'm going to run through why I fish each area at what time of the day and what baits I use and what rigs and all that sort of stuff. Firstly, I'm going to talk about my rigs. What I've set up today, very simple, as I say. I've got 3 different depths I can fish in. I've got 4 and a little bit foot down the middle. I've got 3 foot on the slope, and I've got 2 foot up against the far bank reeds. It's not the shallowest water, but it's the shallowest water I want to fish in. I don't want to go any shallower than that during this time of year. So to begin with, I've got my middle rig. This is where I'm going to feed maggots down the middle on the siltiest area. All my rigs have been plumbed up and all ready to go, as you'll see in the previous video that we've done. So this, as I say, is my track rig. I have a 4x12s float, which is quite light, but we've got no wind today. So I can have a nice foley through the water float with a nice strung out shot in. I've got an 0.14 millimeter main line to an 0.10 hook length, nice and light. And my shot in is simply strung out number 10s in the bottom, nearly the bottom half of my rig, probably, yeah, just between bottom half and bottom third of my rig. It's getting to that sort of area, and they're just spread out every couple of inches apart, number 10 shot. I've also got a size 18 pellet hook on as well, a nice light hook that I can fish single and double maggot on. Nothing too positive. Well, that's my first rig. That's going to be for catching all sorts through the water. The rig's really light because of the way I'm going to feed my peg. I'm going to loose feed it by hand, so hopefully I'm going to catch fish all the way through the water. If I was to use a heavy rig, then I'd go down a little bit too quick and I'd miss out on catching any F1s that were feeding off the bottom. Lots of eye. There's some big eye in this lake that they can put 20 pound on your weight. So by having a nice, almost a roach type rig, if you like, that's falling through the water nice, I'm going to pick up everything on that. The second rig I'm going to fish is my pellet lines. My 2 pellet lines are going to be across in 3 foot and 3 foot and 2 foot of water. So the first I plumbed was my 3 foot line. This has got a 4x14 float. This is a wire stem as well. The centre down the track's got a carbon stem float because that's going to follow me bait through the water. The one on with my pellets is going to be lowered in vertically. So with that, I need a wire stem float. It also helps to keep my bait a lot stiller because a wire material wants to bed down in the water and keep your bait still, which is vitally important with pellets. Also on the subject of keeping my bait still is my shotting. This helps to keep my bait exactly where I want it, which is a nice positive shotting. So I've simply got there, I've got 6 number 9s and a number 11. That's just to get my float right. But mainly the 6 number 9s right at the bottom end of my rig, almost in the bottom quarter of my rig, that keep my bait really still on the bottom and also short my bites really good. Because I've got a number 9 so close to my hook, as soon as a fish dislodges that number 9, I'm going to get nice positive indications, which is what fishing pellets is all about. If I have too small a shot there, then I'm going to have tiny little indications that I don't see and I may not even strike at. So I'm missing out on bites. This will actually help magnify my bites and show me a lot better what's happening in my peg. The same as the centre line, I've got 0.14 main line to an 0.10 hook length. We shouldn't be hooking too many bigger fish. The F1s are generally around £2 with the odd bonus carp. They're easily landable on 0.10. I'll even go as far as dropping to 0.8 if I need to. We shouldn't do today, but once it gets colder, happily use 0.8 and think nothing of it. Again, we've got a nice small size 18 pellet hook on that. We can use anything. So the deeper rig was a 4x14s float. The one on 2 foot of water, I've dropped down to a 4x12s float. I don't quite need that stability because there's no wind, so I can get away with the 4x12s. But a 4x12 still gives me plenty of weight. In this case, I've dropped down a size of shot in, and I've simply got exactly the same rig as the 4x14s, but a condensed version with number 10 shot. Simply spread, starting on my hook length and then working every inch further up. Just proportional to the size of the rig and the depth I've got. It keeps everything really nice and simple. So the last element that I will talk about on my 3 rigs that I'm going to be using for feeding is a back shot. I never ever fish without a back shot when I'm fishing on the bottom. I find it helps me to keep my float stiller by sinking the back shot and sinking this little piece of line here. It helps me maintain a much more stable rig and keep everything still in any surface wind. What it also does is allows this piece of line to be constantly tight. So in turn, when I do strike, because half my line's tight, I'm responding to a bite a little bit quicker than I would be if it was slack all the way through. Again, that's mainly for my pellet fishing, but I've incorporated it into everything else because I find it just improves my presentation. So the last rig I have set up, just to begin with, to see how things go, So what I've noticed is the colour's dropped out quite a bit, it's the first time I've seen this. I've not been down here for a couple of weeks. The colour's definitely dropped, so the fish aren't feeding quite as much as they were. Because of that, I've set up my first bread dobbing rig of the year. With that, I've just got a 4x10 float with a really nice visible bristle. And with the bread dobbing rig, I have a simple bulk under me float that can be moved up and down. That's a bulk of 5 number 10s, and then I have 4 number 12 shot evenly spaced down my rig. That just gives my bread a really slow fall. Because I'm suspending my bait off the bottom, I don't have to worry about my shot showing my bites up. Because it's suspended, my baits can actually be registering on my bristle, so I should see bites nice and clearly anyway. By having a really good bristle that you can see, you can drop in lots of different places. The light's notoriously bad in the winter when fishing up against rushes and trees and reeds, whatever else. So by having a nice bristle that's really visible, you can drop it wherever you want, rather than just having to focus on a couple of places, and you can search them fish out a lot better than being restricted by the type of bristle that you have. So on that one, I have a decent length of line as well. I've probably left myself 3 foot of line, no, 2 foot of line, just so I can move it up and down. It's not as fixed as it needs to be. I can move that shallower, deeper. I can try whatever I want with my bread. So all depending what area of the peg I'm going to drop it in. But that's what I'm going to begin with. Bait for me winter session couldn't be easier. I make sure that I keep things as simple as possible to give myself less options. I want to have a few baits that I make work and I understand how they're working, rather than have a bait tray full of all sorts and not knowing what the flipping heck's going on, to be honest. So what I've got some maggots down the middle. Generally three pints is probably the maximum you're going to use at this time of the year. So a good bait box full, plenty for feeding that middle line. They're going to be fed, literally, I'm not going to feed them for the first hour. I'll talk about why in a minute, but they're just going to be fed a nice handful every 5 or 10 minutes. Once I start feeding it, probably a couple of hours before I intend on fishing it. That's going to build my line up nicely. As I said before, across is going to be where I fish pellets. So I've softened up a pint of micro pellets there. So they're nice big micro pellets. It's really important with my micro pellets that they don't break down. I want a nice big pellet. In this case, these are just the Baggham 2mm ones that I can put loads of water on them and they'll swell up and they'll stop. So they don't carry on breaking down to a mush. To find the right ones, it's generally just a case of buying them and finding the right batch which behave right for you. But I definitely recommend the 2mm Baggham ones are spot on for it. They swell up to a nice big fat micro pellet that if it comes to it, I can even put one on the hook if it gets that desperate. So I've got some 4mm expanded pellets on the hook. I think the fish is still eating, so a decent standout bait can work quite well when I'm catching 50-pound plus of fish. When it gets a bit more difficult, I've got to find things down. But at the moment, expanded pellets are still fine. Lastly, I've got my bread. I've got Warburton's Orange Toasty, by far the best bread for dobbing there ever has been. And I use that with a 7mm punch. That's perfect for all my dobbing that I need. So it really is simple. It gives me very, very few options to confuse myself with. If it gets really difficult to cross, I've got the option of feeding maggots over there. But to be honest, by personal choice, I'd much rather feed pellets. So by concentrating on them, I'll understand exactly what's going on and where the fish are feeding in my peg and what baits they want on the day. Right, now to begin my day, I'm going to start with a little bit of bread dobbing. But the best thing I like about bread dobbing is it doesn't disturb my peg. So I can fish any area along that far bank I want without disturbing them. I can always go back and feed in the area later and potentially still catch fish. What having a little dob about does, it tells me what's available to me, how many fish are feeding in my peg. It also means I can leave my peg without feeding and watch what other people do and see how their pegs are responding before I commit to anything in mine. So by having a quick dob in a few favourable places across, I give myself the option of catching a few fish, maybe a couple of bonus carp even, which can often have a go on bread, whereas they don't want to feed on any other baits. But I'm still not spoiling my peg by putting any bait in at a time when the fish don't really want to feed on any bait, which the first hour very much so can be a very slow period in the match. What I'm going to do, so it does have to be really important that I watch what everyone else is doing while I am having a quick go on this. So if I find that someone else close by me is catching fish by feeding very quickly, then I need to follow suit. It's pointless fishing in a really negative fashion, such as just fishing a bait with no feed around it when the fish want a bit of bait. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to drop this in just to start with in half a dozen different spots, just to see if I can catch a couple of quick early fish. So if it doesn't work, then I won't hesitate to quickly get some bait in and start feeding. So unfortunately today we haven't got the guide of what any other anglers are doing, with just being ourselves here. So very quickly I should know if there's any fish willing to feed on this. What you're looking for when you are dobbing your bread is you're just looking for a little area where there's maybe a couple of fish held up. I think they live in very tight shoals, or they settle down in very tight shoals in these weeds during the winter, with sort of safety in numbers, if you like, with a lot of fish will be in one weed bed, whereas the weed bed next to it may have no fish in. So it's by dobbing it about, trying to find somewhere that I get indications, and then I can concentrate in that little small area then to try and catch a few fish. So I don't give it too long. I probably give every little area maybe a minute at the most. If I don't get an indication, I'll move on to somewhere else. Just keep dropping it about until I see something. So it's quite important with that bread to keep it moving as well. I don't like a bait suspended at half depth or off the bottom for any amount of time. I think it's very, very unnatural to the fish. I do believe you get a lot more bites just after it's fallen. That's the main period, if you like, that I'm going to get my bites. That's where them 3 number 12s down my rig come in, because they give it a really nice slow fall. Lets the bread sink almost naturally without any interference whatsoever. It's only the weight of the hook actually taking it down. Right, well I haven't even managed to have a bite on the bread, which, to be honest, it doesn't really worry me. I think it just says that there's very few fish in the shallowest possible water at the moment. I had my bread rig set probably 10 inches shallower than my shallowest rig, so just off bottom all the way along them rushes. All I'm going to do, I'm just going to put probably 50 pellets in my cup, and I've baited that up with an expander. Put that lassie in a bit. I'm going to ship out to my first peg in 3 foot to see how good that is. So this is going to be the first area that I feed in my peg. I'm going to ship out to my marker. So it's very important the way I put my rig in on this line, to make sure I don't go past my mark and put any line on the bottom. So what I need to do is keep my rig in the water, ship up to the tape where I have my tape as my mark, tap a little bit of bait in, and then I'm going to lift my float and let it swing in towards where I'm feeding, or where I've fed, towards where I have it plumbed up exact, and then I'm going to drop it in. So by putting it in that way, I know I'm maintaining a tighter line as I possibly can to my hook bait. I'm letting it fall in naturally into the slope, rather than dropping it in a ball and potentially, or dropping it in a heap and potentially allowing my line to be slack at the bottom end of my rig. By putting it in that way, letting it fall into the slope and pushing it up, and maintaining that tight line in between my last shot and my pellet. What I do have to be very careful with, because of the way I put my rig in, is that I can't really lift and drop my bait. So what I'd rather do is, if I feel that there's a fish there, I'll tap a little bit more bait in, I'll lift my rig up, swing it towards myself, drop it in, and then repeat the process of letting it swing into the shelf. So if the bottom was a little bit flatter, or I was fishing in the shallowest water I possibly can, which will be what I'm doing in the 2 foot line, then I could drop it straight in a line, because I can't find any shallower water. Because this is so plumbed up so accurately that if I'm 2 inches further past, then I'm going to be a couple of inches on the deck, then I need to make sure that my rig goes in that way every go. So saying, those pellets that I put in my pot, I didn't put them all in one go. I'll try and space them 50 pellets out into 3 or 4 feeds, where I can just tap a couple of pellets out, just to create a little bit of bait going through the water and hopefully pull some fish into my swim. We have my first indication then, and we missed it. What I'm going to do is get rid of my pellets, any that I've got left, so I don't want to spread them all over my peg. Start again. Now I'm not going to put quite as many in this time. I'm going to put probably 30 pellets into my cup. What I am doing is I'm making sure that this is the only line that I have fed to begin with. Hopefully by giving the fish minimal options on areas to feed, it'll create the maximum amount of competition as possible for this little bit of bait I'm putting in. So as long as I'm fishing in the correct depth where the fish want to be, then hopefully I'll be achieving the maximum amount of competition for my little tiny pot of pellets that I'm putting in, which in turn will create better bites, and it should make this peg last a little bit longer. Whereas if I'd fed 2 or 3 lines in advance, then I'd have split the few feeding fish that there are at the start of the match into lots of different areas. I'd decrease the competition, and in turn I catch less fish. Got another bite then. There's definitely a few fish in that little area. See, to begin with, I find it really important just to tap those little bit of baits in, little tiny bit of bait in, because the more bait I can have falling through the water, the more fish I attract into my peg. It's not about the volume of bait that you have on the bottom that pulls fish in, it's the bait falling through that brings new fish into your swim, and in turn creates more competition for that bait as also. So to begin with, I'm going to tap it in, but once there's a few fish in my peg, and I start suffering things such as foul hookers or possibly liners, then I'll change the way I start putting my bait into my peg. I'll just put it in one hit, and I'll try and put it in after I've caught a fish, or maybe before I have a bite. I'll alter things around a bit to make sure the fish stay on the bottom once there's a number of them in my swim. So, but to begin with, we still need to attract some fish into that area. See, I've fed 3 lots of bait now, probably three lots of 10 with those pellets I fed. And what you generally find is you get sort of a 30-second window. After every little portion of bait you put in, you probably get 30 seconds where you may get a bite. After those 30 seconds, you need to either refeed or come back, put some more bait in your pot, ship back out and feed again. You get a much quicker bite by feeding again than you will sitting and waiting for fish to come over that little lump of bait that's on the bottom. So to begin with, you have to keep drawing them fish into your peg with the bait falling through the water. It's noticeable, there's definitely a few fish in my peg, but there's very little on the bottom. I'm getting quite a few false indications where the fish aren't putting their heads down on the bottom. They're not happy to go to the deck in 3 foot. So if I don't start catching fish in the next couple of feeds, then I'll look at moving further up the slope of the canal into 2 foot, where hopefully I might get some cleaner bites, some proper bites. Because at the moment the fish definitely seem reluctant to go right to the deck. Come back and feed. So I put probably 30 pellets in again. I'm just going to maintain 30 to begin with in my pot. So I could fill my pot, which would prolong the time in between me coming back and feeding again. But the last thing I want to do is feed a tiny bit of bait, still have a full pot and hook a fish, and then end up spreading that full pot of bait all over my peg. So just by being a little bit busier and shipping in and out with that feed, there's less chance of me spoiling my peg by putting too many pellets in, just through being lazy, not wanting to ship in and out. Finally hooked one. I don't know if it's quite right. Just after that feed, I had a little tiny bite. Nope. I think they definitely weren't quite right about that then, as if it was just off the bottom or something and I foul hooked it. Which is surprising. I wouldn't expect to do that with the first fish that comes into my peg, or one of the first. You should normally get a few bites, but so that could be quite a clear indicator that they want to be in shallower water than what I'm fishing in. I'm just going to give it one more chance, and if the same thing happens where I don't get a proper bite, then straight away I'm going to move up into the shallower water. That was a much cleaner bite, that one. So hopefully we just caught the hook the scalp before, that we've having a little look before. He's just settled in. This feels like only a little stocky, but to begin with, as long as it's an F1, I'm a happy lad. So what I need as well with all my fish, it's very important that when I've caught a fish on pellets, it's hooked in the same place. All your pellet fish should be hooked right in the middle or right in the top lip. Very rarely should you need to disgorge with an F1. What that's telling me, because it's where it's hooked, is I'm seeing the bite immediately as it happens. If a fish is taking the bait down too deep and I'm having to use the disgorger, then what's generally happening is there's too much slack in my rig and the fish is having too much opportunity to suck in my bait and take it right down its throat, which, although we can fix that easy, we can catch that fish and that's great, it also means that we may have missed 2 or 3 other fish that have taken it and spat it out before we saw an indication. But with that one being hooked right in the middle lip, I know that I'm plumbed up perfectly as I need to be. So what I'm going to try and do now, there's a few fish there, is tap my bait as soon as I get to my peg, and then hold my float out, and then if I can time it right, I'm going to drop my feed in, well, I'm going to drop my rig in with the feed that I've just fed. So my expander pellet becomes one of the pellets that are sinking as well. I think this is the safest time for a fish to take a pellet, is just as it's falling. So by making mine blend in with the others, having a bite then, missed it like a plonker. By making it blend in with the others, there's a better chance of them fish taking my pellet, as opposed to having to inspect it and then decide whether they want it or not. Because at the end of the day, I definitely feel that our pellet is hideous compared to the ones that we're feeding, because it has a piece of metal in it at the end of the day, which makes it very hard to make it behave naturally. So by putting it in with the other pellets, hopefully I can get much nicer bites, much more competition for that bait, so they'll happily take my pellet. We've got another one there again. It's just one of the small stockies, but so the first hour I'd be well happy catching fish of this sort of stamp up here that are probably 2 to a pound. So I can have a nice starting weight before the proper fish start to feed later on. Of course, I'll be keeping a very close eye on what other people were catching, and if I noticed that people either side of me were catching more fish or bigger fish than me on different areas of the peg, i.e. probably shallower towards the far bank, then I wouldn't hesitate again in moving there straight away if they were catching old stamp F1s, if you like, of a £1 plus. There's quite a few fish there now. I'm getting, as that went in there, there was a little bit of an indication, but not a bite. It was a proper bite then. What I am having now also, I'm having a slight breeze coming from right to left. There's no toe on the water. It's not backing up, it's going with the wind, so that's just surface movement. Because of that, I'm making sure I hold my pole to the right hand side of my float. And by putting my back shot in the water, a couple of inches away from my float, I create a nice tight right angle where the line in between my pole and my back shot is tight, but I'm also very close to my float. I'm keeping a tight line to my float and then holding it in place with the tiny back shot that's sunk underwater. So normally I find that a number 8 back shot it's okay in most conditions. What I'm after is that tight line between my float and the back shot. If it becomes really windy, then the weight needs to be increased just to maintain that tight line at all times. So I may increase it to 2 number 8s. On a really windy day, it may go as much as a BB shot. So whatever it takes to maintain that line under the water on a tight line to my pole. Again, another small stamper fish, but so they're coming nice and quick now. You're getting a bite every minute, so you could easily put a good 15 to 20 pound of these in the net in the first hour and a bit, the way they're coming. See, it is almost like a conveyor belt now, and you're just repeating exactly the same steps every cast while you're catching these fish. There's no point changing anything while you're getting bites or while you're hooking fish. There's a lot of fish in that peg now, so as long as I don't start foul hooking them, they should remain nice for a while. That one wants me. A little bit bigger. A bit bigger. Still only a small stocky, but so we're going to add up really quickly if we can keep catching them. So that's a good start. Right, well I've had a good couple of hours to be honest on that 3 foot line, and now it has become definitely too many fish there. I'm foul hooking quite a few fish are coming off bottom. I've even seen the odd swirl when I've been tapping my bait in. I don't want to respond to that by trying to fish shallow or anything. It'd be silly to do that this time of year. So what I want to do instead, I'm going to try and push them to the shallower water and just see what's feeding in 2 foot instead of 3 foot. Hopefully by fishing in a reduced depth of water, I'll be able to concentrate the fish a little bit more on the bottom. What I have found as well is noticeably a lot of small fish in that deeper water in about 3 foot. I've only had 2 or 3 of the better £1.5 to £2 F1s. So hopefully by moving to the shallower water, I may find them there. What I've also started doing, so I've probably been fishing for 2.5 hours. I've just began feeding my midline, just where I can feed maggots. I've got my little marker duck going on, so I know exactly where to feed. But I've just started feeding that now. I'm looking to fish that probably the last hour of the match. If I was struggling elsewhere, I may have fed it a bit earlier just to give myself somewhere else to go. But because I'm doing all right and there's lots of bites, I can feed that and hopefully have a really good last hour with bigger fish down the middle of the canal. So I'm just going to feed that with probably 20 maggots every 10 minutes or so. But I'll feed 2 lots of 10 just to maintain a lot more bait falling through the water. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to ship out to my shallower line, to my 2 foot line, right against the reeds, and just see how many fish are in the shallower water, see how much better that is than the 3 foot. See how much weight I can put in my net. We're catching plenty of fish in 3 foot. Definitely have a smaller stand, and I'm having too many problems now. I'm not catching steadily. I'll move into that 2 foot there, a bit of bait in. Hopefully there should be fish straight on that bubble lock. So I do try and time moving up into the shallower water for later on in the match when the fish naturally are feeding better than they are at the start. The last thing I want to do is start in shallow water, spook the fish out my peg and have nowhere to go. We got a bite straight away there. That took 30 seconds to get a bite off that first bit of feed. Unfortunately again it's only a stocky, but it's a nice clean bite. There were no false indications on that one at all. That went straight under and it's a fish in the mouth with a proper bite. So the reason I've changed in this case is because there's too many fish in my peg. Alternatively, what could have happened is if my peg had died and gone to nothing, then what I'd have done, instead of moving to 2 foot, I'd have just found a separate line in the same depth that I was catching at first, because 3 foot was clearly right, there were plenty of fish in it. But if they'd have gone quiet and I'd have spooked them off a line a bit, rather than it getting really good as it did, just by moving to another area and I'd have known to start again, hopefully where the fish have regrouped in that depth where they were happiest. So today they want to have a bit of bait today and they're happy feeding. So pushing them into that shallower water, concentrating them a bit more, that definitely seems to be the way to go. So I'm just going to feed that middle line. Every time I do something, I'm going to feed that middle line. Whenever I've got my top kit back in my hand, whenever I'm on this side of the canal, I'm going to feed it. I'll try not to feed it while I'm fishing, just to maintain my accuracy to be as neat as I possibly can. I don't want to be trying to feed that while I'm holding 14 metres of pole. I don't want to be spreading my fish about and giving them too much of a wider area to feed on. See how we go with that, but it's going in. Definitely a lot of fish feeding in the peg now. Again, that was straight in and a nice feed. What I have done with this, rather than trying to attract lots of fish in my peg, there's a lot of fish feeding now. I don't want to bring fish into my peg too quickly. I put my pellets in one go. So I'm putting probably 20 pellets in my cup, and I'm putting them all in straight away, getting them to the bottom, just to try and stop the fish from coming up. Again, that's a much bigger F1. That's one of the original stockings, if you like, of a pound and a half probably. They're the stamp we're after. They're the real weight builders that are going to get us towards the sort of target weight we need a lot quicker than them stockings. Right, well, just up this fish across. It's took quite a while, or probably waited 10 minutes for a bite on this line. I've probably had 15 to 20 fish in the last hour or so across, which has given me, it's probably given me another 30 pounds to be honest. There've been some really good fish, up to about 3 pounds, some of the big F1s, but it's noticeable how much slower it's gone now. So with an hour left, what I'm going to do is just have a land this fish and then have a quick go down that middle. I've seen a few signs down the middle. There's the odd little single bubble coming up. Should have had in then. It's the odd little single bubble, so hopefully there'll be a few of these big lads or some proper fish settled down that middle. So we'll see. It may be a case of they just want to be in 2 foot, these bigger ones. It's very noticeable how many more of these bigger fish I've caught since I've moved into 2 foot. That's definitely where they seem happiest today, in that sort of depth. That's what I'm going to do. Whiz him down. Pick our middle rig up. Stick double maggots on. There's a lot of small silvers in here, so I always find doubles a little bit better at this particular venue. If silvers weren't an issue, I'd be perfectly happy putting a single maggot on, but with the silvers, get 2 on and it'll just stop the little roach and perch having it quite as easy as they could. I still expect to catch a few. Hopefully should be a little more selective. I'm just going to let that settle right over where I've been feeding. So I'm not going to feed until I've hooked the fish. There we go. So that's lovely. I've left that just the right sort of time and get a bit of bait in now. Get the fish to the bottom by the time I've landed this and get back out there. See, that worked just lovely, that, and hopefully a bigger stamp F1 as well, which it is. Exactly what we were hoping for on that line. A nice little run of these. So you can realistically catch up to possibly even 20 fish on this line during the last hour. It'll give you a good, maybe even as much as 40 pounds if they're that sort of stamp. So it's quite important to keep that feed going in the right way. The last thing I want to be doing is laying my rig in and throwing too much feed over the top of it. All that's going to do is make fish feed above my hook bait. So hopefully now that I've fed, as soon as I hook that fish, but that's done, it's put the fish back down on the bottom. Followed that bait to the bottom rather. I can just lower that nice little rig in. Really nice and slow. I think once the clarity of the water drops out, which it tends to from probably November onwards, having a really light rig with maggots especially, that takes a lot longer, that takes a lot longer to fall, it gives the fish a lot more chance to see your bait falling through that clear water, which with a heavy rig it'd look really unnatural and they wouldn't follow it down. Obviously if the wind's too bad, then you have to resort to heavier rigs just to maintain a still bait on the bottom. Obviously not going to feed this cast, just to see what's happening. I've got it on the drop then. It's quite strange what's going on. I think there's a few eyed there feeding off the bottom. Possibly a few eyed, or even some F1s maybe feeding off the deck. which if it was summer, that'd be brilliant. We'd bring them up and catch them shallow. At this time of the year, it's far better for catching a decent weight to sort of slow your feeding down, or to feed more bait less often and make them go back to the bottom. You'll catch a lot steadier by doing that than you will trying to get them to come up. Much less chance of spoiling your peg as well by trying to bring fish up and go up it with loads of bait. I'd rather catch steadily on the bottom than to catch in spells shallow. Again, it's a much better stamp F1. You seem to find that the stamp of F1s on maggots is always bigger than that of pellets generally. I think with an F1 being reared on a pellet as a stock fish, the new ones take a little while to associate maggots as a food source, which is why you tend to catch a lot more of them little ones when feeding pellets. Although I like having my float as low as possible, what seems to be happening here a little bit is that there's almost too many fish in my peg, so I'm seeing too many indications on my float. So what it's going to be worth doing is possibly popping that float up just a little bit, just so I'm not striking at too many indications and wasting time lifting my rig out and putting it back in. I can take one of my fine-tuning shots off. Don't catch the duck. Much better. A little bit more bristle to work with now, just to distinguish the false bites with the nice little dips like that we're getting. We're still flipping misty. So although we're fishing maggot, it's still important not to do great big strikes, because you slow yourself down a lot having to put that rig back into the water. So every indication that I think's a bite, it's just met with a nice little lift, and I left my float and probably 10 inches of line out the water, something like that, and then it's straight back in, back to where the fish are feeding, rather than having to put it all the way through the water again, where there's a chance of a silverfish. It's quite obvious at the moment the F1s are on the bottom, and the little silvers are intercepting the maggots above them. To be honest, it's worked out a bit perfectly. Of course, it's only us here, so there's a lot more fish available for us to catch. But feeding down that middle in the last hour, it's been awesome. We probably had 40 pound of fish, nearly 40 pound of fish in just the last hour alone over them maggots where I fed. They've gone a little bit small now, we're catching some small ones, but still, it's been a bite of chuck. It's been brilliant. Well, hopefully what I've shown is, by approaching your peg in a very negative fashion, I never fed anywhere in advance other than the middle. All my areas across, they were approached very negatively, and I only responded to areas and moved lines when the fish were telling me what to do. If I were getting too many liners, then I needed to move into shallower water. If my peg dies, I need to move into deeper water, or I need to move across into that line that I was catching on. But by keeping things really negative and never going for it, I'm always trying to maintain the optimum amount of competition for my little bit of bait that I possibly can. So never putting lots of bait in all over the place and seeing what's best. It's not the way to go. Just feel your way in and the fish will tell you what's happening. Hopefully you've enjoyed today. Next we're going to go on to a match and hopefully employ the same sort of things and see how we get on. Thanks for watching.